2020 was a rough year for the LSU football Tigers. I mean, going all the way back to, the season almost being canceled. And then you look at the opt-outs. I mean, you look at, well, first of all, look at the NFL draft. Again, they had the most draft picks ever by a school in a single year in college football history. Not to mention, losing guys like Joe Burrow, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Patrick Queen, Grant Delpit, Rashard Lawrence, Kalavian Chesson. Just so many other players. Justin Jefferson. So many other players that they lost to the NFL draft, including losing 4 out of the 5 starters out of your offensive line. That is absolutely huge for the LSU football Tigers. But yeah, then you had COVID, and then you had the opt-outs. No one expected to lose guys like Kerry Vincent and Jamar Chase. No one expected to really lose those guys as well. They lost their nose tackle. I forgot what their nose tackle's name was, but they lose him. He played a huge pivotal role on LSU's defense as far as freeing up other guys in the interior and the outside to go ahead and pressure the quarterback and stop the run. You lose him. So it's a big loss. LSU lost tons and tons of losses, not to mention Dave Aranda, your defensive coordinator. You lose Joe Brady, who we found out now that he was one of the biggest factors for LSU winning a national championship. You lose your passing game coordinator in Joe Brady, and you kind of bring in coaches that were kind of outdated. That I guess they demanded too much respect from the locker room, and they kind of lost that respect. Not to mention that there was a lot of controversy during the Black Lives Matter movement, and there was some controversy surrounding LSU and that factor, and so many other allegations. Just way too many distractions for the LSU Tigers during the offseason. So, going into the season with everything that was settled, they lost to Mississippi State, which it made Mississippi State look like they were going to be a juggernaut until we found out Mississippi State was just not a good football team. LSU they just crumbled. Their defense crumbled. Offensively, they played pretty good for the most part, but they forced way too many turnovers with Miles Brennan. A lot of people really kind of jumped off the Miles Brennan bandwagon after that game. And then it was just a struggle, man. You lose to Missouri. You get crushed by Auburn. It was just... It was a mess. It was an awful mess for the LSU Tigers. They lost 5 games, even though 5 games really doesn't kind of seem that much. For 2020, losing 5 games by a defending national champion, that's a hot mess. Not to mention that you lose to your biggest rival in Alabama and you get crushed by Alabama, pretty much them scoring 55 points on you, which is a record set in Death Valley. So, a rough year, but for the LSU football Tigers, they lost players. They lost players before the season. They lost players even during the season. They lose guys like Terrence Marshall and Eric Gilbert, and it was just, again, I keep saying this word, but it was truly a hot mess. Obviously, Ed Orgeron after the season, or I shouldn't even go there. They made a turn in the middle of the season by beating the Florida Gators. Marco Wilson throwing that shoe in a very competitive game where Florida should have won that game, right? But with Marco Wilson throwing that shoe, you can make an argument that was the turn to LSU season, and even beyond, looking forward to the 2021 and 22 season. With him throwing that shoe, it seemed like LSU got the win, and then they went ahead and beat Ole Miss. But during those 2 games, you saw players step up. You saw Keyshawn Butte stepped up. You saw Jaquelin Roy step up. You saw Max Johnson step up. And even before that, TJ Finley showed some spark. Miles Brennan showed spark as well. You saw John Emery show some spark about why he was truly a 5-star player. Eli Ricks was the best freshman cornerback. You make an argument, was the best freshman defender in the country. You saw a lot of the young guys that were kind of forced in those roles because of the amount of opt-outs and players that went to the NFL. You saw a lot of those players step up in during the season. And now that you have a majority of those players back, 20 starters from your football team back, that is a big sign for the LSU football Tigers. And again, a lot of those players could have left if it wasn't for Marco Wilson potentially throwing that damn shoe. Man, again, it was a weird year for LSU, obviously a disappointing year, but then going to the 2021 season, if you're an LSU fan, you can't help but be excited. Again, you have Ed Orgeron. He cleaned house out. He cleaned house, Got guys like Durante Jones and Petty and Mangus to kind of really help out your football team, the coaching staff. Not to mention that they're very young. I think the LSU Tigers have one of the youngest coaching staffs. They went from having one of the oldest coaching staffs to now having one of the youngest coaching staffs in the country. So we have to so we definitely have to take that into consideration going into next year about coaches that are really that can relate to the players. Ed Orgeron talks about going into 2021. He talks about that we have to really focus on leadership, because one of the things that was horrible was the leadership. They didn't really have any players that can step up and really were leaders until late in the season, because the chemistry was really off, because they really didn't have a bond to form during spring camp, not to mention all the NFL opt-outs and transfers that just came in. Players really didn't have that much time to kind of bond and really gel and really get this team focused and ready to really buy into this year. Now for 2021, there is kind of no excuses now. I think we all can expect for LSU to be an improved team, not just an improved team, but potentially compete for an SC West title and even beyond that. I have expectations. A lot of you guys have expectations as well. And now it's kind of go time. We'll see what LSU can do for the 2021 season, but there's a lot of losses that LSU looks to kind of redeem. You have the quarterback, you got the running back, the receivers, the offensive line, the defensive line, the secondary. You got the coaching staff now. You got everything that you need. Now it's kind of, it's time to see if LSU can truly bounce back and potentially not only compete for a West title, but maybe compete for a national championship going into 2021.